Welcome to the Abundant Wellness Podcast. I'm Andrea, registered nurse, functional health practitioner, author, and mom navigating the very real trenches of parenting kids with sensitive, complex nervous systems. This podcast is for parents who are tired of being told to just try harder, who feel the grief of realizing you can't fix your child, but still refuse to believe that this is the end of your story. Here, we talk about what actually helps: nervous system informed parenting, functional health, the gut-brain connection, emotional resilience, and faith in the middle of the mess. See, you're raising a child who's not broken, but deeply wired. My hope is that every episode helps you to feel less alone, more anchored, and better equipped to support both yourself and your child. If you're ready for compassionate science, honest conversations, and hope that doesn't bypass reality, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Abundant Wellness Podcast. On today's episode, we have Amy Jones, a certified ADHD Life Coach, Ontario certified teacher, and certified functional nutrition practitioner. Amy, I'm so excited that you're here with us. I already have a million questions for you that I'm so excited for our listeners to get to hear from you, but I would love first, before we dive into all of that nuance, just to hear a little bit about how you got into the work that you're doing and what kind of inspired that process for you.
Yes, a very long journey. So I was a teacher for 20 years at the high school level, and I don't want to say crashed and burned, but definitely experienced burnout because I felt like there was something missing all the time in terms of supporting not only my students, but within my own family. And I always have been someone who was interested in wellness and health and movement. And I just one moment said, okay, you know what? I think it's time to pivot. I think I would need to do something different here. Part of that came because my youngest son was diagnosed with ASD and ADHD. And then I had that moment as I entered perimenopause, like, wait a second, this sounds a lot like me. And really dove into that as I was doing my functional nutrition training and just started to see how food actually really affected behavior, affects sleep, affects so many pieces. Yeah. And it was really exciting to see that. So as I started that practice, I started to notice that there was something else missing. And I think my teaching background kind of helped me with that and to pinpoint it and see it a little bit more clearly.
Yeah.
We can know all the things about how much we need to eat of this and what we should avoid, but how do we actually do it? And especially for those of us who are neurodivergent, we feel a lot of shame around that. So that's where I started to notice there's something missing here. So that's when I, again, went back to school because apparently that's what I like to do.
I love it. I relate to that so much where it's like, hey, I see this thing missing in my, in the medical realm, right? Where it's like the information's not being provided to me. So my first thought is like, I'll just go back to school to learn it instead of trying to find somebody who maybe already knows what it is. That's just, I have an itch for learning as well. But I love that you kind of just took the reins on that and recognized, my child needs something. I need something. I'm not sure if it exists yet. And so I'm just going to kind of create, I think that's actually one of the beautiful things about neurodiverse brains is that we automatically think outside the box. Like there is no box. We just always live outside of it. And so it also allows us to really help fill in the gaps for families that don't fit in that box of, I remember it was probably very early on in my pediatric training where I was getting a nutritional rundown from one of the pediatric nutritionists about how this child should eat and how many calories. And she was giving, this education to the parent. And I remember the parent just looking at her like, how am I supposed to do? He's 2. And so one, you have a toddler, but then you have a medically compromised toddler who's having behavioral resistance to food. And the nutritionist just left. And I was like, so how do we fix, all of a sudden there's this really big gap, right? And I think that that's what families raising neurodivergent children or discovering that we have a little bit of a sprinkle of that ourselves, we hit this clash, right? Where it's all the Pinterest methods don't actually work for us. So can you tell me, or can you tell our listeners, what are some common struggles that neurodivergent children have in regards to food specifically? We're going to get into the behavior aspect of this too, but I think it's really important to understand that with ADHD specifically, ADHD and the autism spectrum is a very wide spectrum, but let's just say for the sake of conversation, just ADHD. It's not just a behavioral issue, and it's not just an attention issue. There's usually sensory cravings, food cravings, and things like that kind of in the mix as well. So what are some common struggles that you see for children and their families that are neurodivergent?
Yes. And this is a huge piece of this. And I love that story that, well, I don't necessarily love it, but in terms of but how do I do this? That's part of what I work with clients on is there's a lot of little nuances that we didn't realize were part of this neurodivergent picture, right? As a whole, definitely sensory issues. And that can range from so many different pieces. So it can be, there could be textural things. There's some kids who will eat oatmeal. Other people will gag when they look at it. So I think it's more really diving into what looking at what does your child eat or favor right now. And that can kind of give us some clues around what some of those sensory things could be. And then we can start actually building in options to expand that sensory awareness and tolerance, essentially. But it's not as easy. It's just like, here, now your 2-year-old needs to eat this and this and this. Like it's so much more complex than that,
right? Because
it has such a huge impact on their nervous system and their relationship with food and how we build it in. So some of those, so definitely the sensory piece is enormous. The other piece of it too is the one food at a time thing, or, foods not touching each other in that way. They're, which we work on that again too. If they're going to eat it, as long as it's not near anything else, great, let's do that, right? And then let's add in other stuff. And it doesn't always have to be, dinner doesn't always have to be this like huge production. It can be one thing if that's what they need. So it's really thinking about that and really breaking it down in that way. So some of the sensory things are enormous. I also think the emotional regulation showing up around meals.
Yes, and it's a big one.
Yeah. And what their day has already been like, and I keep kind of thinking dinner because this is the thing that I think a lot of us struggle with as parents. What happened before this? We don't even know sometimes what they ate, how much they ate at school or not. Or maybe there was a lot of emotional energy or stress that day and they're burning through and all of these nutrients that they need. And so by the time they sit down at the table, they won't eat anything. So there's a lot of pieces. And I think it's so specific to each family for sure.
Yeah. There was something that you touched on just at the very beginning of this part of the conversation, which is really understanding. And I so wish that I had known this at the beginning of, well, one, my daughter was diagnosed with PANDAS. And so there was, there's a lot of overlap in symptoms of ADHD, even ASD kind of under that umbrella, but it was triggered by an infection. And so I so wish that somebody had just sat me down and helped me to understand that her food refusal, all of a sudden, like the sensory overwhelm around food, she went from like the 2-year-old eating a salad at daycare, to like, the look of it, like it's not yellow and it's not orange, so I'm not going to eat it. And I'm like, well, I don't even know what this is. If somebody had sat me down and helped me to understand that it is primarily not a behavior issue, it is a nervous system response. And to, like you said, to the whole picture of their day, their week, their month. And so if they're overwhelmed from, let's say, like they had a big test at school that day, you're more likely to notice this almost like a pullback or a reactivity to, at least this is what I've observed. And I'm curious if you hear this from parents too, like, whereas yesterday she might have had the capacity to try something new. Or if I say, don't forget your protein, she can grab jerky or she can grab a hard-boiled egg or whatever. And now all of a sudden today it's just mac and cheese. That's all she'll touch. If somebody had explained to me, this is not a behavior issue that you have to try to parent out of her, but just recognizing the capacity of the nervous system, how that's coming into play in this particular part of her life, And then how do we create opportunities that feel safe? If I had had that type of conversation, oh my gosh, it would have saved so much frustration and fighting over food. Like I don't live in a ton of regret over that because I was doing the best that I could, but I don't love that she had that experience of me as a mom. Does that make sense? Parenting a child with ADHD, autism, PDA, anxiety, or ODD, and you are exhausted trying to figure out what's actually going on, I want you to hear this. Many of the kids I work with also struggle with symptoms like constipation, diarrhea, bloating, skin issues, or brain fog. And while it can feel like the behavioral and digestive pieces are separate, they're not. They are deeply connected. And that's why the Happy Tummies, Happy Kids program helps to resolve this problem. It is a 4-month root cause approach program that looks at your child's whole system through a functional lens, not to change who they are, but to improve their function and reduce suffering regardless of the diagnosis. If you're wondering whether this kind of support is right for your child, the next step is to book a Strong Start discovery call. It's a conversation with me to understand your child's unique needs and see if this program is a good fit for them. You can schedule a Strong Start discovery call using the link in the show notes. You don't have to figure this out alone, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.
Yes, my heart. And you just like, you absolutely, as you said it, I put my hand over my chest because I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. And I feel it. And this is what I often see also. And I think it's about, and a lot of what I do is give permission to mix it up because we are so inundated with the shoulds around, especially as women, maybe the primary food maker in the home. There's so much guilt, like we should be doing this. Our kids should be eating their greens and all their other things. But why does it have to happen at dinner? Like, I'm such a big fan of the mini meal and placing it somewhere where is their capacity? Also, that was the other word I love that you said, because I literally live inside that word also, is constantly checking in. Where is their capacity right now? I mean, we don't necessarily even need to know what happened at school that day. It's more about, I can see right now that you don't have the capacity to sit down and eat broccoli. So we're not going to do that. We're going to do
much less around a table with your siblings who are making loud noises and jumping all over the place because the neurodivergent dinner table looks a little different than the Pinterest picture, right? So yes, I'm sorry.
Sometimes
keep going.
Dinner happens while they're jumping on the couch. Sometimes dinner, and I'm like, great. And then we're going to go, we go and do whatever it is, what sports we're doing. But this is what it looks like today. And that's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. It's then now thinking about where is their capacity? Where do they have more capacity? Right. And where can we start thinking about bringing in some of the balance of what we would like them to have, right? What is safe for them? That is not going to turn them generally just say, no, I'm not eating that, because we hear that a lot too.
Right.
So I think it's more rethinking the structure around eating patterns and this idea of like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I just want to like throw it away.
Yeah.
For us too, right? So I think it's really starting to tune into that capacity level.
Absolutely. And, the other thing that I want to just point out with this is that for a lot of kids on the spectrum or that have ADHD, their internal cues are not they're not communicating. So those hunger cues are not maybe the same as a neurotypical. I'm being very like overgeneralized here, but a neurotypical person that's like, oh, I feel hungry. And they actually feel that in their stomach, right? Like, or their stomach growls. And all of a sudden they're aware of their hunger. Whereas somebody on the spectrum or, has ADHD, it's more likely to look like I'm really crabby all of a sudden. I feel really anxious all of a sudden. And oh crap, I forgot to eat. I have not eaten in 8 hours. Like that's more what that looks like. If I ask my daughter, are you hungry? Sometimes she can tell me that she is. Other times it's like, I don't know. And they genuinely don't know because they don't have the same physical sensation as what we're used to thinking about food, right? So on that note, are children, in your experience with ADHD, and I'm just kind of using that as like the umbrella for the conversation today, but we'll just say neurodivergence as well. Do they tend to be more sensitive to blood sugar dysregulation? That's been my observation, but I'm curious what you have observed with that too.
Yeah. And that's where I live and work. Capacity
Awesome.
and blood sugar regulation.
Awesome. Okay.
And then this is actually something that we had to fight for with my own son, and that I really try to help, whoever I work with in terms of supporting their children too. But he goes to school every single day with his little like bento box. We call it his little snack box.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just filled with, his favorites and of whatever it might be. But he opens it up and sticks it on his desk first thing in the morning. So even though he has eaten breakfast, he goes to school, opens up his snack box, and he just eats all day. And that is what, and I know there's, so much around, but we need to let our digestive system rest. I'm like, that's great. But if he's having a meltdown, that's
because
not
he's
helpful.
hungry. Yeah. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and it's hard because, a lot of educators, and I know this, I was never one of them, but I was always like, even if we weren't allowed to have food in the classroom, I was like, just bring your food in, because I know it helps them regulate, right?
Right.
It keeps their blood glucose levels at a state where they're not going to have, a huge drop that's going to trigger that irritability. And again, it comes back to that they don't know often that they're hungry, because of that interoceptive awareness piece for a lot of us can be dulled, right?
Right.
We don't recognize it, especially in the little young ones. They don't know. So this has changed the game for him. And I would really suggest pushing that if you notice this, right? Especially if they get home and then that's when you see often a lot of meltdowns.
Yep.
They're not eating enough throughout the day. They're not eating consistently enough throughout the day.
Right.
That's a big sign, but that's a huge piece. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you're mentioning this, because one thing that I think would help listeners to know is that ADHD and autistic brains, they use a tremendous amount of metabolic energy. And this is, it just comes back to my neurofeedback training. I look at brains all the time and I'm just like, wow, the metabolic demand on this brain looks exhausting to me from the outside. So our strategies then have to be different, and they have to match that metabolic demand, because otherwise we're expecting them to quote unquote behave when they don't have the nutritional supports in place to allow for that behavior. So, I have a mom that I'm working with right now at the neurofeedback clinic that, like clockwork, every day after school, a kid has a meltdown. And I'm thinking, okay, it's 3:00. He probably had lunch at like 11:30 or 12. And then it was class, recess. So a lot of mental energy and then a lot of physical energy. And then he is like totally crashed out by the time he gets home. I'm like, first thing you do when you like have a snack box in the car and feed him, like, don't talk to him, just feed him. Like, just throw snacks at him, whatever you got to do. Like, he might not even recognize that he's hungry. Get him some string cheese, some nuts, some jerky, whatever, like just his favorite things, and see what happens. And then you might need to feed him again before dinner, because again, that metabolic demand is really, really high for these brains. And so I think just understanding that they're burning through not just physical energy, but that physiologic energy that the brain requires. And so we have to treat it as such, right? So that being said, I know one of the bigger struggles for these kids is pickiness, right? And so we feel sometimes a little bit trapped with our options. Like we know that they need protein. We know that they need cleaner protein. We know that they need fruits and vegetables. But how do we get them to eat them is the question. So I know what's worked for us, but I really want to hear what has worked for you. What are some ways that you kind of find yourself working around that for families?
Yeah. And it's definitely very complex when there's sensory issues involved as well. It's hard just for anyone who's trying to expand someone's palate, but it's definitely more difficult. So the way that I approach this usually is around definitely understanding what are the safe foods for that child, what is safe, and then offering other foods. So even things like putting out, a plate of maybe some cut up fruit or cut up veggies, and you just put it out and you don't say anything, and it's in the space wherever they are, if they're doing their homework or if they're whatever it is they're doing, and it's just there and you don't say anything and there's no pressure. And then we just leave it. And then if they don't eat it, then we put it in the fridge and we can use it for something else or whatever, right? We can repurpose. Yeah. So it's not going to be wasted if they don't eat it that's a big piece for moms too.
Yes.
Can be a barrier for even just putting it out. So offering is really important. No pressure, especially if we are a family who wants to sit and eat together. Just always offering the safe food, and then putting other options on the table that maybe they've eaten before.
Right.
They may not feel like today, and that's okay. And we just let them eat what they have the capacity for, but it's there, it's visual, it's in front of them. If you are also eating that, we're modeling, that is going to be helpful for them. We don't have to, I think the biggest barrier is, please eat your broccoli. Did you just take one bite? Don't take
the pressure.
Don't need to do that. Especially with neurodivergence. So I think that's a way to start and step into this. There's lots of other complex things around, especially around ARFID that can be, there's other strategies if it's extreme. It sort of depends on where this is at for that child in terms of nourishment. But again, it's also like breakfast doesn't have to be breakfast. Like it can look completely different. It's about where are we going to put those nutrients throughout the day. Yeah.
I love that. And I think probably the hardest thing as a mom in this situation is letting go of the emotional tie that we have to, I don't know how else to describe that. It's like this emotional connection that we have to wanting our kid, and it's probably primal, just this, like, my kids need to be fed, right? And so then we lay it out for them. And I, for myself, had to really do some mental check work of like, before I put this out, I'm letting go of whatever her reaction is going to be to this. And I'm just offering, because clearly what I was doing before is not working. Like, she's starting to resist and refuse simply because of that, almost that PDA demand avoidance. Right. And so I just had to do that mental work of, before I lay anything out, before I make this dinner tonight, am I okay with her not eating it? Because if I'm not, then I need to go give myself a little time out, go for a walk, do some of that internal work, and maybe offer something different that I'm okay with her refusing. Because we do have that, again, I think some of it just comes down to maybe how we were parented, or the generation that we lived in, grew up in, where it was like, you eat the food on your plate. And if you don't eat the food on your plate, then, all that comes with that, whatever that is. And I remember being pretty picky as a kid, and like, I didn't like my food touching. And, if it smelled weird, I wouldn't eat it, which I think is fairly normal for most people. Like, that's a way you protect yourself from gross food, right? Is if it stinks, you don't eat it. But at the same time, like, I would just pretend I wasn't hungry instead of being offered something else. So I love those strategies around just providing opportunities and making it no risk. Like, this is not high stakes, right? I tell people all the time, I'm like, my kid survived off of five foods for almost 5 years. She's doing great. She's okay. Like, her labs look good. Like, her teeth are great, so not that that's an ideal situation, but sometimes when you're in that extreme kind of situation, that is the best that you can do. And now her palate is expanding. She eats most of what we provide for her, but it still has to be low pressure, lots of opportunities. And she still sometimes will get in this place where she'll say, I'm hungry and I don't know what to eat. And that's my cue that blood sugar is kind of coming into that lower state, because she's not able to think through, like, what are the food options I'd like to eat. And so at that point, it's more like a charcuterie board. I literally just throw whatever I have on a plate: sliced apples, peanut butter, pickles, potato chips, whatever, and eat what you want. And I will bring it up to her room, leave it up there, call it good. So
and again, it's like coming back to the capacity piece too. But I love that. That's the idea. So that often I'll take like a cupcake tin container and just fill them with a whole bunch of stuff. But I think it's also that capacity thing where I still fall into this trap too, where we always like, okay, I'm going to offer them 2 choices. So I'm not going to offer 18,000 choices, because that's too much. Yes. I recognize his capacity is lower, but even that can be too much. Yeah. And so sometimes, because he's just, it's just too much, right? So I think it's more, we just have to do that. That's when I put the, the snack plate together, and you just stick it in front of them. You don't say anything, right? And then it's that automaticity also that they just need that. And then all of a sudden everything changes, right? In terms of their mood or their regulation. So that's a huge, really important piece. I think that I think managing us, our own nervous system, number one. We also, especially if we have partners in the family, this is also another challenge that I often see a lot too, is if the mom will come to me to support the family or a specific child, but we have to get all the members of the family on board with, we don't say these things, including grandparents, or including whoever else might be. And that's hard, but it is really, because often we're retraining, that idea of being stuck at the table until you eat all your broccoli. So there's a lot of different pieces, but I think it's more about the awareness of it. It's more about letting go, again, like you said, like letting go of some of that shame around it, or some of just the feelings around, am I even feeding my child enough? Yeah. Like, that is so stressful.
It is.
But they actually don't. I mean, and you understand this from your experience, and everything that you've done with pediatrics, but they don't need as much protein as we think they do all the time. And so I think everybody stresses out about that.
Yes.
And I think it's really more, again, about this blood glucose regulation piece. Eating consistently throughout the day is better from what I've seen in terms of a emotional regulation perspective than 3 meals, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Or meals that they won't eat also.
Right.
Yeah, available, safe food. So yes, like never have I ever said you're not allowed to eat chips. It's how do we eat them? It's more about, right? If we're not, or just
even like what kind of chips you're going to have in the home.
Yes.
Like we have control. Like I don't restrict hardly any of the food that's in the house, but I'm also the gatekeeper of what I buy. And so if it's like, I know that goldfish is, because of the gluten and maybe the food coloring, like super reactive for one of my kids, I'm not going to buy that. But will I buy chips and other crackers? Yes. And do I restrict them? No. Yeah. So I think sometimes we can feel, or I've had other parents say this, where they feel like I'm just at the mercy of their diet. And it's like, I understand that feeling. But let's talk about within that, because I'm sure that I'm not the only one hearing that. If a parent's in that position where they're like, I feel like I'm just at their every whim, and there's foods that I don't want to be feeding them. Like maybe your child is allergic to dairy and all they'll eat is mac and cheese. So I'm curious, how do you maybe help to navigate some of those more complicated situations where the parent does actually need to have a little bit more control over what's brought into the home, and then giving full permission once it's inside the home? Does that make sense?
I think so. So for example, the mac and cheese, and especially if there is a dairy sensitivity. So thinking about frequency, how often that happens. Yes. Sometimes they go through those periods where that's all they will eat, right? Yes. And I think it's, again, our own mental, like our own sort of training and our understanding around this, that this isn't necessarily forever. And if this is what they are going to eat right now in order to get fuel in them, that's one way we can sort of think about it. We kind of have to let that go also. Yeah. But the other piece of it is that we can start to sort of think about, how do we add in other foods that are also safe for them, and then maybe scale back on the amount of something. So if it's just mac and cheese right now, maybe we're going to add another safe food to the side of that, reduce the portion size just a bit of the mac and cheese. Again, we're not pushing. That's really good. Right? But we're adding in something else so that we can, maybe it's just not as much. Depending on the age, I think the other part of this is really helping them tune in, like their interoceptive awareness, which I know I struggled with, and I know my youngest does too, a lot, in terms of understanding what's happening, how you're feeling after you eat something. So
yeah, that's a big one.
But that's really difficult, and it depends on the age. But I think, but you can start very young and just like, oh my goodness, what's happening right now? And not necessarily always connecting it to the food, but in particular, but maybe really helping them to tune into, okay, if they're not feeling well, what's not feeling well in their body, Where is it? Show me where you're like, if you're so mad right now, what's going on? Where do you feel this? Is it in your head? Is it in your tummy? Is it in wherever? Right.
Right.
And so not even connecting it to that mac and cheese, because we don't want to make the mac and cheese become evil.
The bad guy. Right.
Yeah. Right. So it's more about training them to look for those pieces inside of their own body, because we're often so disconnected from those.
One of the biggest and most easily fixed issues that I see in parents raising neurodivergent children or parents of children with a complex medical diagnosis is actually mineral deficiencies and low electrolytes. When we are under chronic stress, as raising these children is chronically stressful, we run through our electrolytes and our minerals very, very quickly, which then puts a lot of stress on pretty much every organ system in the body. So one of the things that I teach a lot of the parents that I work with is a very quick action step, which is to just grab a scoop of electrolytes and add it to your water 1 to 2 times a day. It's one of the easiest ways that you can nourish your body so that you don't end up in a state of depletion. When we are mineral balanced, when our electrolytes are balanced, we sleep better, we respond to stress better, we bounce back a lot quicker from events that are really stressful. So one of the electrolytes that I use is Paleo Valley. They're super duper clean, no food coloring, no yucky ingredients, super affordable. I have a 15% off link for you in the show notes. One thing that you can do to care for yourself today is to grab some electrolytes, add it to your water, and remind yourself that you're worth nourishing too. That's really good. And I love that the strategy of kind of starting with, okay, maybe we can't fully eliminate this right now because maybe it is one of their only safe foods. And then that swings us into, okay, then they're going to eat nothing, which is not ideal. So let's look at just kind of pulling back on it, filling the plate with other options and seeing if we can start to move in that direction. And I know the times that I've tried that with parents, usually it's actually helping the parent cope with some anxiety around that because they're wanting to avoid triggers and meltdowns, right? Totally get it. But we do have to start somewhere. And so slowly moving in the right direction is still moving in the right direction, right? And also, I think the other piece to this, and just a random thought on this, is we also kind of have to guard the information that's coming at us. Like if all of the accounts that we follow on Instagram or YouTube or podcasts are hardcore restrictive, everything has to be clean all of the time, that's going to be fueling your anxiety because it doesn't match the situation in which you live. Like that might not actually be possible for you or your child right now. And so I just want to encourage you, if you're listening, like there were accounts that I had to just kind of mute for a while because I was like, this is actually giving me anxiety, like about something I can't actually control or fix right now. And I think it's okay to give us permission to, unsubscribe from that Pinterest channel that's totally perfect, that doesn't actually help us. Raising neurodivergent kids is a very different way of parenting, and we have to be okay with that. This is probably a lot more personal, but I'm curious, and probably very much depends on the situation too. But when you have, let's say, family members that are not on board and tend to be more like a negative influence, whether that's dad or grandma or grandpa or aunts or uncles, I have my thoughts on, and maybe it's just perimenopause where I'm like, I just don't even care if I offend people anymore. I don't know. That's probably not the right way to swing. I think there's a lot gentler ways to address it. And again, it does depend on the family dynamic. But what are some words of encouragement that you offer parents in that situation where you know that there's kind of this constant dripping of negative comments, or why aren't you just make her eat the broccoli? You go ahead and try.
That's my favorite.
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead and try. Tell me how that works for you.
Yeah. And I think yes. And it's so complex. This is why I had to go back to school to do my ADHD life coaching certification.
Because the life coaching part.
Yeah, because there's so much, like as much as we're talking about nutrition for neurodivergent children, there's so much parent coaching in this, because there's so many, especially if that parent is neurodivergent themselves or is recently or suspects they are, there's a lot of pieces to sort of, pull out about what their own barriers are, their own relationship with food is. And so that's usually where that conversation starts. And then it's, and sometimes I will do this too, because I want to reduce cognitive load on everyone. And I'll write out a script after we have a really good understanding of what that relationship is, or what it might feel like at the table. Let's say if it's a major holiday and we're all having a big meal and grandparents and all these, and then they're making comments, really breaking that down, like what is hard about this? And we have to do the work before that too, to make sure that they feel confident in the fact that this is how we're eating, because this is how we support this child's, energy, etc. Like there's ways that we can talk about it. And also, even depending on the age of the children, communicating with them that you might hear those kinds of things. You're never pressured to eat anything you don't want to eat ever.
Yeah.
Like really, and creating that culture in your home so that even when we're out somewhere else, or we're out doing something, or we're with grandparents or with friends or whoever, it doesn't matter. You are never forced to eat what you don't want to eat ever.
Yeah, that's really good.
It gives them license to. And so if we have that already, and I think that's the thing that has actually helped me regulate in those situations, because I've already set that up. So I don't have to worry about what they're saying, and I don't have to react. I can just sit there and say nothing, because my kids know. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And they'll look at me across the table like, huh? And I'm like, no. And I'll just tip my head, and they're like, oh yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that's really good. And I think the hard work of this is owning it for yourself. And like, I can be okay even if these other people at the table are not okay with my choice. I'm okay with my choice, because ultimately I know it's what's best for my child. Now, usually there is some work that we have to do around that, because there are obviously relational dynamics around those responses, right? I remember for us, we had family members that didn't understand what was happening to our daughter, that it was something that was actually happening to her, not something she chose. Right. And there were some comments that were made, and, I just had my husband kind of send a text message saying, hey, just so you know, this is what's happening. This is not something that she has control over in the future. Just know that because of her food sensitivities, and we just kind of left it under that umbrella, because it was like actually a medical sensitivity. It was not, not necessarily like the sensory overwhelm with food or some of those other, I don't feel like eating something orange today. Like it wasn't in that. It was the actual like reactivity to food that we just said, we will bring our own food. Just know that like, we're not trying to be rude, but if we're going to be a part of family gatherings, this is kind of how it has to be for right now. And we would appreciate any comments or concerns be directed to us privately, if that is a concern that you have, because really that is how it should be handled. If you are concerned legitimately as the parent or the grandparent in this situation, have a private conversation and then just be willing to listen, because most of the time there are very legitimate reasons why this child or the family can't eat the way that we think, if we lay out this big Easter dinner and we expect them to sit for 45 minutes and wait for the rolls and the turkey to be done. And you know what I mean? Like that just doesn't fit in some of these situations. So I think the coaching is really important here, because it is, we have very real relationships with people that we care about. And we don't want this thing that we're experiencing in our family to be a detractor to that. And so how do we have some of those more nuanced conversations, and then just training our kids to respectfully say, no, thank you, or I'm not allowed to have that, or I don't tolerate that. Both of my kids will just say, oh, I don't tolerate that, because they physically don't. Right. And so, so it's a process. And I think I would just encourage the listeners, this isn't something that happens overnight. This is something that you grow into and develop kind of an ownership around. And there will be a day where it does feel easy and more confident for you to say certain things. But obviously, reaching out for coaching and support is also really, really helpful. What is something that you wish, this is the loaded question, you wish that you had known at the very beginning that would have saved you a lot of time and stress and relationship with your kids?
Wow. I think, it is definitely loaded, but it's the biological, physiological connection between something that especially with ADHD, everyone sort of thinks it's in your head, but how it actually manifests in the body, not necessarily manifests, but how it is affected, what it looks like, what's happening in the body. You talked about the nutrients, right? Burning through nutrients, the metabolic inconsistency that can happen and how that affects, irritability or emotional regulation. That is enormous. And I really didn't have an understanding of that as a new mom, and even just supporting myself as well in terms of those pieces. It is profound. And I think once we start to let that settle in, that it's not because they want to make us angry, or that their behavior is because of their personality, right? It has something to do maybe with their values or their moral. It has nothing to do with that. Yeah. And I think once I figured that out and took that burden off of my own shoulders and started to get really curious, like, what's going on here? Mm-hmm. What have I missed? What are the patterns that have happened, not just with food, but with nervous system regulation, rest, movement, sleep? What are those patterns showing me right now? They're manifesting in some way. So let's figure that out. It's not about our lovely little child who's melting down, and I think that's really powerful. Mm-hmm.
That is really good. And I think, I think we need more people telling us that, because so often, we're hearing the, like, why is your kid misbehaving, or why are they doing these things? And we're hearing all the negative. We're like, if I knew the answer to that question, I would not be struggling right now. First of all, but this brings me to a really good point that I think we need to make about ADHD. First of all, I hate the name, because I feel like it does not at all actually describe what is happening. So, and I really do think that that we will eventually get that change to where it does represent what's actually happening in the body. But ADHD obviously stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's not just about attention, though. It's emotional regulation and dopamine signaling, and either over recycling dopamine or under recycling dopamine, and that can change on a daily basis. So a lot of people think like ADHD is, it's just somebody who can't pay attention or somebody who's really hyperactive. But really, under that umbrella, there are so many other symptoms that people experience. It's not just inattention, it's an inability to regulate emotions at times, and a sensitivity to blood sugar dysregulation that maybe is, different than their counterparts. And so I just wanted to point out that the name, I wish that we could just throw it in the garbage, because I don't think it actually describes what's happening. But that if you're noticing some of these signs in your child and you're thinking, look, no, it can't be ADHD because they're not hyper. It may be ADHD, but it's more landing, especially for girls, I think this is true, in the emotional dysregulation or inattentive type of ADHD, where you're just a little forgetful, right? A little scatterbrained. And maybe it's not showing up in the classroom the way that we kind of typically assume that it does. So I just wanted to point that out, that if you're listening and you're like, oh, my kid couldn't have ADHD because they don't have hyperactivity, or they don't struggle in the classroom, to look at some of the other peripheral signs of what the mechanism actually is for this, that it really is emotional dysregulation and a dysregulation in dopamine that can look like 100 different things. Yes. So I'm not sure what you think about that, but that's my strong opinion.
I am right there with you. I'm on board. That's exactly how I feel. And the thing that popped into my head too is how PCOS is now PMOS, which is
finally.
So it can happen, right? So it can happen. And finally, things are being recognized in a different way. So fingers crossed, we're on our way.
We'll get there.
The more of us who are having these conversations about, like what you just said, in terms of blood sugar regulation and emotional regulation, in my experience, the emotional regulation piece is the biggest, most frustrating thing to struggle with, I think, for everyone. So, and then that's where I do the downstream, like, what's going on? Are we actually getting nutrients? Are we eating consistently? A lot of the time, because we're under this stress response, we're not even digesting our food properly. Like our stomach acid is not where it needs to be. So often we start with some of those, like, digestion, imagine, which actually helps us get the nutrients we need to make energy and make those neurotransmitters.
Right.
So there's a lot of stuff there. To me, it's always connected to the biological parts, similar to you as well. But it is that idea of, to me, I don't want to say all about emotional regulation, but
it's
it really,
a huge piece though.
Yeah, because it helps us prioritize, right? I know that from my experience, what I see is we have so much attention, we don't know where to put it.
Yeah,
and
that's a good way to say it.
A room, right? And we're like, oh my gosh, and we're overstimulated, or there might be so many things going on. And it's hard for us to pinpoint what we need to be doing, what the priority is in that particular environment. And that, if you think about that from a child's point of view in a classroom, and there's so much going on, and we're just supposed to know we're supposed to be paying attention to the teacher. Right. And that can look so different. Like for me, I was a daydreamer, super creative. That's where my brain was. And then I'd go through a whole lesson and realize I didn't listen to a single word the teacher said. Yeah. And that looks so different than my son, who he just needs to move when he's listening. Right. Right. So that's all he needs. And then it helps him focus on what he actually needs to be paying attention to, and it helps him have a little bit more of that awareness. But it is, again, it's this, like, it can look so differently in every single human. And I think that's the brilliance of it, and also that's why I love working with this population too, because we get to be creative together. We get to figure things out together. I don't think I've built anything in terms of systems of supporting, parents, but also perimenopausal women. Not one thing has ever been the same, ever. Yeah. Which is amazing and exactly how it should be, in my opinion. And going back to what we said at the very beginning, it's why we are so good at thinking outside of the box, because that is literally just how our brain is wired. It's always outside the box, like that. And that's how we problem solve. Right. Yeah. And I personally, I love that about myself. I've not been formally diagnosed with ADHD, but I've got a little sprinkle of it. And who knows if it's perimenopause induced or just, neurodivergence part of it. But I've learned to love that about myself, because it actually really, really helps me in the most complex cases that I work with. So I love that you get to lean into that skill set that you have as well, and really help families that are struggling. So what would be the best way for people to find you if they're looking for coaching support, nutrition support, all of the amazing services that you have to offer? How can I direct them to you? Yeah, I think Instagram is sort of my bigger hub, I guess. Yeah. So it's just Amy Jones Nutrition. And then my website is also just www.amyjonesnutrition.com. Yeah, those are the two easiest ways. And you can reach out or message me on either of those platforms. Amazing. Well, I have loved this conversation. I'm sure that we'll have you on again in the future, because I feel like we just kind of cracked things open, barely scratched the surface on some of the things. So thank you so much for being with us today, Amy. I know that the listeners are going to get so much out of this episode. Oh, thank you. And thank you for your voice, because I think you've brought a lot definitely to me, and I've sent your episodes to my clients, and thank you. There's so much that you are saying, and the more voices we have saying the kinds of things and the kinds of ways that you're saying them is really important to support all of us. Thank you. Oh, well, thank you. That's extremely encouraging to hear. I never know who's listening. I'm not one of those people that actually looks at the stats. Yeah. I probably should, but I realized that it's just a random side note, but when I look at them, I get discouraged. And so I'm like, I'm just going to keep showing up because it brings me joy. And these are things I want to talk about. And I'm just going to trust that it's going to get to wherever it's meant to get to. So I'm so glad to hear that it's been encouragement for you, and keep up the amazing work that you're doing. I will drop, for those of you that are listening, you should be able to see the links to connect with Amy in the show notes. And thank you so much again, Amy, for being here. Oh, thank you.